Hello. I'm making a video and I want to talk about jealousy issues in general. And I will always use my own case file, as an example for this. And it is important that people make videos about their own issues because the whole world has issues. And if some people talk about it, that helps, that makes people feel safer to talk about these things to others or even make videos about it. And the more people make videos about it, the more it is out in the open, the more it is being discussed by people, the less people are afraid of revealing themselves, with all of their issues and everything, revealing their entire mental illness issues and so on. And most people don't reveal anything about themselves. So, because they're afraid of being judged, and they're afraid of being bullied and criticized and humiliated and mocked and all of that. And that is what's happening to me, and it doesn't feel so super, but I make these videos anyway, and I talk about this stuff anyway because I see the importance of talking about this. It is absolutely vitally important for the whole world that people start making videos about their utmost inner worries, fears, paranoia, nightmares, brain terror, mental illness, and so on. Even if it is cluster B, some people are ashamed about their cluster B issues. Some people are proud of their cluster B issues. So when there's nothing to be proud about, they somehow identify that with being tough, and that's when things become extra like a glue almost, that's when things become extra grooved in. When the ego identifies with certain things, then they have absolutely no incentive to work on it and fix it and heal it and make themselves well, because then the ego likes it and feels safe in that niche of whatever they identify themselves with, like whether that's toughness or group identification, whatever it is, status identification. My family has that going on really, really hardcore. And so that made me, the jester, go extra against that. So I was like, no, not with me, not in my life. No, I'm not gonna follow into that groove of status identification. Okay. I don't even need to be identified with anything. Okay. Should I be identified with this nice cushion here? Yeah, I love this cushion. But why should I? I'm creating the cushion, the pink cushion identification. I become the pink cushion guru and make a religion out of it or something. No. Should I identify myself with this fish here? Why should I love this fish, but I'm not going to identify myself with that fish. No, that's not necessary, says the fish. Not necessary. We can grow fish in vitro. I talked to Paul about this earlier. So I laid it all out, what needs to be done to make the world a better place. Okay, grow fish in vitro. Save the oceans. Okay. This is a life-threatening emergency. What's happening in the world? But I want to stick to the subject, jealousy. But ultimately, all of this ties in with one another in one big ball, in one big circle. Because people do all kinds of things out of jealousy and out of competition, and then the greed out of competition, out of ego, and the ego because that they haven't been loved, or it's like it becomes an inherited issue. Even there's mental illness that has been inherited. Okay, so even if they didn't have it that bad in this lifetime, they can inherit pain from their own previous lifetimes that was not unfinished business. The Buddhists they call this hungry ghost energy, that can carry on into this current lifetime. And hungry ghost energy can also happen with people that are in between lifetimes, that come back, that are in a state called bardo. It's like some kind of threshold state of energy ether. It's an ether state, so they haven't formed into something yet. But they have left the other existence. So that happens, obviously, and those are literally hungry ghosts. But we can help them. We can help them, not by chasing them away, not by making a bunch of noise, not by shining bright lights into the corner, or taking the roof off the house and letting the sun shine in, or hanging garlic from the ceiling. No, I mean, obviously, hungry ghosts, they often don't like these kind of extreme smells or bright light, and they're very sensitive because they're in the ether, obviously. But that doesn't help them. They just move somewhere else. They move to the backyard. Yeah, so I already heard people talk about this on the internet. The Green Witch talked about this. I think it was last year in October. She made a Halloween video, or several videos, where she talked about this old table that they bought in an antique furniture store, and there was a hungry ghost attached to that table. I believe her fully. Some people are probably not going to believe this, but I believe her. I left her long comments. I'm sure she did not like the comments that I left. My comments always go way too deep for people's egos, for people's comfort zone. I'm not blaming her or anything. I love that girl. I feel very motherly feelings for her. Okay, so but I see what's going on. I'm very, very intuitive with this. But what we have to do is the way we help a hungry ghost energy is with compassion. Okay, whether that is in ether form, or you can see it only on LSD or on shrooms. Yeah, that happens to some people. Then they can see that thing, that energy bundle that's there in the room. And they can't see that when they're not taking that veil off their eyes, the discrimination ribbon, really. And it's somehow, in a roundabout way, it does tie in with discrimination in general, but we have an actual discrimination ribbon in the brain, and we have to have that, or we would be running into walls all the time, would be stepping into potholes We would be run over by cars. We certainly can't drive a vehicle. If we didn't have the discrimination ribbon in the brain, we would be constantly tripping, literally. Our whole life would be one big LSD trip. And it's not fun, I tell you that, because my discrimination ribbon is very weak, okay, that I have in my brain. So I'm constant, that makes me a psychic, okay. So that makes me see a whole lot more stuff than I would be seeing if my discrimination ribbon, which is an actual brain formation, this consists of meat, of matter, okay, of neurons, of brain matter. And that's somewhere in the middle of the brain, the midbrain area, the limbic system area, there's this formation called the discrimination ribbon. Dr. Hinak Emrich, I think, discovered it and called it the discrimination ribbon. It's really a filter. It is a filtration. It is a perceptual filtration. We perceive things, and what we perceive runs through that filter, and this filter weeds out the stuff that comes from the ether, mainly, okay, so that we can function in our life. We don't have to become 150 and go on SSI, which all these old hippies are on, because they have overdone the LSD trips and they have totally weakened their discrimination ribbon, and then it ties also into discrimination in some way, where in some roundabout way, where we have psychological discrimination that we do, but it is a much different subject, really, but it ties in a roundabout way with that. So people who have weakened their discrimination ribbon, they're like seaweed. They're completely gullible. They're completely suggestible by the corporate agenda. So in the past, the corporate agenda was tooth and nail against all of this, because they thought it was making people less afraid, and it was taking their psychological discrimination away, and it was all the good things, like we're all one, and people weren't racist in that mental state, and it was love and peace and flower power. So the corporations were afraid of that, because they didn't know that ultimately down the line, these people below that discrimination ribbon all the way into shreds and pieces, and then they are more gullible and more suggestible. So that's actually what the corporate agenda wants. So now they're not. Now it's turned around because of that. Now the corporate agenda wants you to take your shrooms, because they know with that they can manipulate you better. Okay, so everything is yin and yang, plus and minus. So LSD or shrooms, LSD is something that they actually created synthetically. I guess they could synthetically create this psilocybin type of chemical molecule. I think it's an oil industry derivative, which is absolutely not good for you, but they mimicked this from the actual psilocybin mushrooms. So I forgot now exactly the chemical name for this. LSD, Lysi, something like this. Salicylic acid, something like this. I have to research this again, and maybe if I remember, research it and put it into the video description. So you need to go by. You need to walk by. I'm making a video now. This is really heavily important information, and I am not gonna turn this off. No, no. This is like I cannot lose this information for this video, because I just cannot run this entire thing up again, because Paul is like I need to walk through. No, I talked about really important things now, and that has to stay in the video, and that has to be uploaded because it's very, very important. And I keep talking about this off and on in my videos because it's very, very important. Okay, taking these kind of chemicals is playing with fire, because you make yourself into a corporate slave with that. Initially you think you're suddenly not corporate, you're suddenly in that moment, but then with every drug or with every dependency on whatever it is, some people use cutting. They cut themselves in order to create, to have the brain release, to have the pituitary gland in the brain signal to the brain that the brain is a laboratory, signal to the brain to create and release endorphins. And they get addicted to those endorphins. And they link it up with the cutting, and it is a direct link, because it's in a roundabout link. It's a link cycle. The cutting stimulates the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland signals to the brain to create and release endorphins. So it's a cycle. But with every drug, whatever it is, after a while, the brain, it gets habituated to it. It gets dependent on it. So then it becomes more difficult to create these kind of chemicals under a different circumstance. Like then when there's a habituation happening, then maybe they fall and break their leg and they are in terrible pain. And then the brain is so habituated, then it becomes sluggish with this, because it had been overused. And then the brain cannot even create their own painkillers, their own anesthesia in that moment, the way it should do it. Okay, so, and then they become dependent on narcotics and all of this. So I just realized something, that when we suffer from depression and real extreme mental illness issues that are unresolved, and we're dealing with these mental illness issues on a daily basis. I deal with this my whole life. Every day I'm dealing with this, but I go consciously into it. And because I don't want to run away, I know the danger of running away from it. So I cry it out. Okay? And that's the right way to deal with this in that moment. Most people don't. They cover it up with something else. They cover this up with something else that they then are ashamed about. Then they have to cover that up, what they cover up the first thing with. And then they have to cover up that one as well, because of shame and whatever, and pride and so on. And denial, and it's like a cascading effect of suppressing emotional pain, which doesn't make the emotional pain go away. And then the brain is flooded with this emotional pain, and that is perceived by the pituitary gland just as physical pain is perceived. Of course, pain is pain, whether it's physical or emotional pain. And then the pituitary gland works overtime and signals to create endorphins, different endorphins, including some like, I don't know what they're, I forgot the names now of all of those different ones. Different type of endorphins, different type of narcotic substances that the brain naturally then produces, and that in turn as well can that can that can get tire out a little bit after a while, and then people have even more pain, and then it escalates into even more pain. That's why it is so important not to run away, not to cover it up with something, because the ego always wants to cover things up. The ego is and that's not some kind of separate entity. It's a mechanism in the brain that comes out of unconsciousness. It is a knee-jerk reaction mechanism in order to avoid feeling this or that way, particularly the emotional things, like shame and fear and paranoia and all these uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, painful emotions, terror, fear of the future, fear of people, and then people go into covering that up with drugs or with different behavior, with cutting maybe also. All of this ties into one suffering cycle. And the brain is just totally overloaded with not just the cutting itself, but with that emotional pain itself that floods the pituitary gland. So then that gets worse after a while, and that's really bad. And so when for example, I have jealousy. Now let's cut to the chase here. So I have jealousy issues, and I know a lot of people do. I think the vast majority of humans have jealousy issues, but they would never talk about it because they're afraid, they're ashamed. So they cover that up, and that's that cycle that just makes things much worse in the long run. So talking about this is a release of this energetic bundle. The moment I talk about it, like in the fairy tale, there's a gnome in German fairy tale called Rumpelstilzchen. I don't know, some people might be familiar with this fairy tale, and this gnome is very, very proud that nobody knows his name. And it is a metaphor. It stands for suffering and agony, and the ego also, the ego covering up the agony. Nobody knows my name, and that makes me have power over the world or something. But at some point, someone discovered his name and said, I know your name. Your name is Rumpelstilzchen. I got you. And in that moment, Rumpelstilzchen stepped on his own long beard, and he strangled himself to death on the beard, and he couldn't function anymore because his name was discovered, and he had no more power, and he was in a dopamine habituation loop. So he could no longer act out, and then underneath was just the suffering, pain body, So it's a metaphor for our pain, We want to run away from it, but if we talk about it, we call the kid by the name. I see you, Rumpelstilzchen, I see you. I see into my own mind. Insight, okay? I also see into you. Into me, see, into you, see. Okay, intimacy. Okay. Intimacy cannot happen unless we are allowing ourselves to look into ourselves, and then we have the ability, we have the space in the brain to look into the other as well and see the other with the whole package of suffering, act out, denial, resistance, and struggle, and so on. And then we can feel sorry for that other person. We can feel compassion for the other person. And I get to that mental state many, many times throughout the day. I have different days, Some days I don't get into that sky perspective where I can see the other person. I'm too much, I don't have space. My brain is cluttered with my own pain. So then I know what to do. I have to look into myself. I have to go into meditation. I have to go into the inwardness process. I have to say what's going on here, jealousy, baby. Okay. And I do a bunch of stuff, I do a whole bunch of stuff, avoidance type of thing, hand washing, excessive cleanliness. Believe it or not, that finds its path back to the jealousy bank account, So different people have different trauma, different pain, different emphases with different type of trauma and pain and act outs and so on. For some people it may be greed, fear of being financially down and out or not, so most of those have jealousy too, but they may have that more than the other. So for me, I don't have that at all with greed and financial and any of those things. What that has to do with the fact that my brother and I, we thought money comes out of the bank and it's just always there, right? It just endlessly flows out of the bank. So we haven't been traumatized with this. So the greed and the hoarding stuff, that's why I call that the US specific mental illness. This is very, very US specific because it's called total capitalism, where people are where they actually have to be afraid to lose literally the roof over their heads. Okay. And it happens. So
don't let him outside.
No.
There's an emergency.
Okay, emergency.
You hear me?
Yeah, I'm not letting him out.
Emergency.
Yeah. This is an emergency. Emergency. Okay. I look like I'm drunk, but I have to laugh about this all the time. Yesterday, he called that lifeline on his phone, and it's like, I cannot hear this. Cannot hear what the robot is saying. You have to help me. So I would help you. Yeah, I finally helped him. And then we wrote down the website and where he has to switch his track phone over to Lifeline, and so he's trying to take all of these things that have to do with the retirement, California insurance, and all of this. So, and he should. I mean, it's better to use that than let the money go to create ISIS or something like this that makes the world suffer. And they have, okay? They have. Under Barack Obama, they have created ISIS, believe it or not. They created a condensation of Islam in order to throw fuel into the fire, in order to get the weapon industry to perpetuate their sale of weapons. It is this ridiculously serious. Okay. I mean, it's a contradiction. It's ridiculously dangerous and serious. It really is. It is insanely insane what the US military is doing. And I've paid attention, so I see what's going on. But anyway, that takes me off the subject. Paul had to open the gate, so that's why. It's life-threatening emergency. Don't let the dog out. No, I don't. So, and he could have said that without waving the hand. He could have said it in a normal voice, because then he's embarrassed to say this. But then he has to come in 10 times and wave. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not showing you. I don't even know what he wants. And then he has to say it in a hyper hysterical way. And that's even more embarrassing, really, So I don't understand this type of logistics. But whatever. It is what it is. If you live with me, you are public. Whether you like it or not. In some form or another. Yes, baby dog. I know. Yes, I know. Paul is opening the garage door. Okay, so all of these things, they tie in with one another. And so let me get to the subject, jealousy. Very, very painful subject. And the vast majority of humans have it in some form or another. Some people might have more greed than jealousy, and others have more jealousy than any of these other things. And that is trauma specific, of course. We have been traumatized during early infancy, and I have been traumatized with abandonment and with a cold mother who was in total pain, emotional pain, thus was not able to love me. When my brother was born 5 years after me, then she was feeling a little bit better. By then, she was able to give him more love. By that time, we had a nice nanny, a nice one, not the mean, those the mean witch fairy, like in that fairy tale Cinderella, the mean stepmother type of hungry ghost with her mean daughters being mean to Cinderella. And that's what happened to me with the wrong nannies. It was so bad that I even said Ilona needs to be burnt and beaten. I said that before my brother was born. I was like 4. Okay, so that's how bad the nannies were that I had. So by the time my brother was born, we had a real nice nanny that had just moved into the room, the nanny room, live-in, full-time nanny and housekeeper helper, Maria. She was young, she was like 23 or something, and she wanted to have kids too, but she first wanted to take care of someone else's baby. And my mother was already in the hospital when she moved in, and I said, Maria, I'm getting a little brother. I was all excited, I didn't know what kind of emotional avalanche was coming at me with this. I made him a bunch of drawings, and obviously he was just an infant. He can't say, I like these drawings, So he was just a totally dependent infant, and everyone loved him. And Maria moved in there just in the right time for my brother to take care of him and to give him the bottle. They didn't even try with the breasts. My mother tried that with me for 2 weeks or something, and because my mother didn't have big boobs, she has like A cup or something. A cup with big nipples, but A cup, there was almost nothing in there. But she did have, the milk glands did produce milk, and she tried to breastfeed me, but the milk was kind of The milk wasn't right. There was something wrong with it. And I think I threw up that milk, and it was very difficult to suck the milk out, and was just, my mother was just, I strongly believe my mother was just not in the right mental state, and also just she wasn't in the right physical state either. She wasn't relaxed. I think that my mother's biochemistry was not relaxed, was not in a flow that was needed for this entire birthing and nurturing process. Okay, so that's very, very sad. So by the time my brother was born, she was feeling better, but she didn't even try to breastfeed him because of the bad experiences she had with me when I was an infant. So after she quit breastfeeding me, after 2 weeks or something, she gave me condensed milk in a baby bottle. And then my brother got some more expensive baby formula. He got everything was laid out for my brother in a better, much better way, more nurturing and better all the way around. And he had Maria as a second mother, and Maria loved him, was there all the time with him. If my parents left on a vacation, that didn't bother my brother very much because he was very attached to Maria, almost like Maria was the number one mother, the real protector. And I was dependent on my parents, particularly on my mother. And when my parents went into vacations, they had to recover from us, particularly from me, because I was always screaming. Then I was just going into hysterical fits, and it was absolutely abhorrent. Tearing my hair out. I was one of those very, very hysterical children. I saw that on YouTube. They have a specific name for that. The children that go into absolutely hysteria. And if they didn't, they would become very sick and die. So, but people think this hysteria is the problem by itself. It's not. It's a reaction. It's a reaction to unimaginable childhood trauma and abandonment pain. Okay, and those babies that don't have that Medusa in them, that comes out, the extreme rage. The babies who don't have that, many of them die. Many of Mozart's children, I think Mozart had like 15 or 20 children. Only 2 survived. And the reason why the other ones all died during infancy is because of abandonment. Because both parents were professional musicians, constantly out of the house, this and that. They threw the kids around with different people that didn't take care of them. It was total chaos in that household. And so only 2 of them survived. What a horror, And maybe those 2 were going into angry fits, That's why they survived. So we shouldn't hold it against a child when the child is hysterical and in extreme pain and screaming. Okay, there's a reason for that. That means they're in a primal scream. That's already right at that moment they're going into the inwardness process. That's what that is. And that's necessary for them, because that funnels that build up energy of abandonment and devastation. And abandonment for an infant mammal of any species is a life-threatening, devastating trauma. Okay, and it can caused them to die. So I wrote a very long research paper on this. It became a book called Betty, and that was the pre-version of that book, Betty. Part of that is still on the internet, some of that. And Betty, the follow-up story and my own research that I put into psychology. So because I had been in a therapy process that lasted for over 2 years with my former therapist, Annalise. And when I was 5, I started at 5, right after my brother was born, because that's when I went completely berserk. And I threatened my mother with a knife, and they didn't know what to do. And so they sent me to Annalise, to that therapy program, and that was a lifesaver for me, because there the Medusa was able to go some more into this pain and scream it all out. And she didn't know what to do. She thought this was scary, or there was something that she thought this wasn't going right, or something. But it was. It was because she was doing it right, that therapy, Annalise, because she had so much love and compassion for me, because she could see herself in me. She saw her own pain in me, and she wanted to help. Because of that, I was able to go into that inwardness process. There's no cognition necessary. There's no thought necessary for it. This is a visceral, biological process. I go into that screaming because I felt safe with her. The Medusa, it felt all of that. It felt safe to run its course through that trauma and purgatory, really. That's what purgatory literally is. It purges this out. Okay. It releases this out. But she was afraid. She didn't know what it was. She called her a professor, and he said that was a primal scream, and he already knew about this. That guy's cool. And he said, you haven't read the book, The Primal Scream, yet. You need to read that, by Dr. Arthur Janov. Yeah, that had just come out like that same year. Or maybe a year before or something. So in the late 60s. And she bought the book, she read it, she was like, oh my gosh, totally. And she was hooked right there. She knew she was doing the therapy process the right way. That gave her reassurance. And that therapy process saved my life. She wrote a book about that therapy process called Betty, Protocol of a Child Therapy. It had been translated in almost every language worldwide. It's still in print in Germany. It's used in universities and colleges as clinical psychology. And I already talked to girls who had been studying the book, and that was very interesting talking to them. And I gave them additional information that Annalise didn't have. And that was also during the time when I was doing a translation into English, but I only got to a third of the book because it was very, very very hard psychologically translating the book. But I might take it on again and translate the rest of it as well. What is it? You can talk. This is a very important video. Okay, I'll make part 2.